Hi everyone, welcome to the next installment of Charts and Perspective, where we use charts to dive into the world of economics and financial markets. I'm Jennifer Nash, an economic and market research analyst for TMX Vedify. Inflation affects everything from grocery bills to rent, making the Consumer Price Index one of the most closely watched economic indicators. But what does inflation mean at the micro level, specifically to your household? Today we're going to try to answer that by taking a look inside the Consumer Price Index, one of the best known measures of inflation. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, aka the BLS, divides all expenditures into 8 categories and then assigns a relative size to each, as shown here in this pie chart. The most recent weighting took place in December 2024 and is done annually. On the right-hand side, the slices are listed in the order used by the BLS in their tables, not the relative size. The first 3 follow the traditional order of urgency: food, shelter, and clothing, which when combined account for over 60% of the index. Then we have transportation, which comes before medical care, and recreation precedes the lump category of education and communication. Lastly, the other goods and services category refers to a bizarre grab bag of odd fellows, including tobacco, cosmetics, financial services, and funeral expenses. So now that we have an idea of what all goes into the Consumer Price Index, let's see how these categories have grown over time. In this chart, we can see the cumulative percent change in price for each of the 8 categories since 2000. Not surprisingly, medical care and housing have been the fastest growing categories, each growing more than 100% since the turn of the century. The food and beverage category is the other one that's up over 100%, in large part due to the steep spike in prices following the pandemic. At the opposite end is apparel, which has grown just over 3% since 2000, but has even deflated at times over the past 25 years. You'll notice a unique feature is the obvious seasonal volatility of the contour line. Transportation, the dark blue line, is the other category with high volatility, much more dramatic and irregular than the seasonality of apparel. Within transportation, there is a wide range of subcategories, but the volatility can be largely attributed to the motor fuel subcategory. Now, one category you might have noticed that is not listed as part of the Consumer Price Index is energy. That's because the BLS does not lump energy costs into a single expenditure category. Instead, it includes energy subcategories in 2 of its 8 components: housing and transportation. With that being said, the BLS still tracks energy as a separate aggregate index comprised of household energy and motor fuels. In this chart, we've added the highly volatile energy aggregate to our 8 categories, and we can immediately see the impact of energy costs on transportations. Note the similar spikes and declines between the 2. In their latest weighting, the BLS assigned energy a relative importance of 6.216 out of 100, meaning the government calculates inflation on the assumption that energy in one form or another constitutes 6.2% of total expenditures, with 3% to transportation fuels, mostly gasoline, and 3.2% going to household energy, mostly electricity. Now, this next chart should come as no surprise to families footing the bill for college tuition, a subcategory of the education and communication expenditure category. Even though the BLS only weighs college tuition and fees at 1.324% of total expenditures, those households with college students have felt the strain on their budget with a relentless growth in tuition and fees. I've separately plotted college tuition and fees in this chart as the black dashed line. You'll notice that the steady staircase pattern in the cost coincides with the annual cost increases in the late summer for each academic year. Since 2000, college tuition has grown nearly 200%. I must admit, though, that the tuition series in this chart is overly dramatic, because the BLS calculates tuition based on the sticker price, which ends up being higher than what many households actually pay because it ignores financial aid grants that can significantly lower the real cost to consumers. Now, at the start of the video, I said the Consumer Price Index is the best known measure of inflation and therefore warrants a lot of attention. But economists and policymakers like to pay even more attention to core inflation, which excludes food and energy. Now, this is a somewhat peculiar metric in that one of the exclusions, energy, is an aggregate that combines specific pieces of 2 consumption categories: 1, transportation fuels, and 2, housing, fuels, gas, and electricity. And then the other exclusion, food, is a major part of the food and beverage category. But I find it interesting to point out that beverage for the BLS means alcoholic beverages, not just drinks. So coffee, milk, and Coca-Cola are part of the food subcategory and thus are excluded from core inflation. Meanwhile, Bud Light, Jack Daniels, red wine, those are alcoholic beverages, and so they are not excluded from core inflation. So this chart here shows the annualized rate of change, the solid lines, and the cumulative change, the dotted lines, in CPI and core CPI since 2000. As of March 2025, the annualized rate of change for headline CPI is 2.4%, while the annualized change for core CPI is 2.8%. However, the cumulative change in these series since 2000 is 90% for headline CPI and 83% for core CPI. While the annualized numbers are the ones you'll see in the financial press and headlines, consumers, especially those who have managed expenses over several years, are most closely attuned to the solid lines because it's easier to grasp the real impact of inflation on purchasing power over time. The universal response is to moan over price increases and take delight when prices are cheaper. But in reality, households vary dramatically in the impact that inflation has upon them. For example, when gas prices skyrocket, a suburban family with long car commutes suffers far more than the metro family with short subway commutes or remote workers with no commute at all. And the pain is even more extreme for low-income households whose grocery money shrinks when gas prices rise. Additionally, those households with high medical costs are significantly more vulnerable than comparable households with low expenses in this category. One thing we can be certain about is this. Inflation volatility has a painful effect on lower income households, those on fixed incomes, those with higher ratios of tuition, transportation, or medical costs, and all households whose discretionary spending is more dream than reality. Thank you for tuning in and taking a look inside the latest Consumer Price Index with me. For more economic and market insights, you can find my content regularly on the Advisor Perspectives website under the AP Chart section.